Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes. Hey, lovers of small businesses and good stories in general. Welcome to episode 132 of Small Business War Stories. And today we get a little bit meta. So today I interview Lindsey Hein, who is the host of I Will Have Another with Lindsey Hein. It's a very successful podcast about running. So it's meta because I'm a podcaster interviewing a podcaster about what it means to be a small business that is a podcast. So I very much admittedly wanted to learn a lot about what Lindsey is doing. But her lessons are useful not only for podcasters. She has a lot of interesting insights about the way that she connects with people in the community. Her podcast is focused on running in the running community. And she's based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. And we had a great conversation and I learned a ton again. This episode is brought to you by Gusto. That's Gusto. And Gusto is a business that helps you deal with the stuff that's a pain in the butt to deal with. Did I say pain in the butt? I meant pain in the ass. It's okay. We can cuss here. And what they help you do is do things like running payroll, doing your benefits, and all the kinds of things that as you start to grow your business, really are going to take your focus away from the things that you really want to do. So go check out gusto.com, GUSTO/war stories, WARSTORIES. And if you sign up, the moment you run your first payroll, you will get 3 free months. So go check it out. But for now, let's get into the conversation with Lindsey Hein of I'll Have Another with Lindsey Hein in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we are live here in beautiful Indianapolis, Indiana. And today I have the pleasure and honor to sit down with Lindsey Hein. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
And you wear a lot of hats, but you are the host of I'll Have Another with Lindsey Hein.
That's right.
And it's fascinating to me because I've had other podcasters on the show before, but never have I focused with somebody on what it's like to be a podcaster as a business.
Yeah.
So I had John Lee Dumas on the show, and I had a few other folks who have podcasts. I interviewed a business in Wichita a while back that they have a podcast, and they talk about things. But I'm really, really interested to learn, and you have a fascinating story, so I'm interested to learn from you how you are turning all of these passions that you have into a business, because I'm inspired by it and I want to learn about it, and I'm sure our listeners do too.
John Ledumas, he's a big name.
Yeah,
Isn't that his name, Ledumas?
Yeah, Lee Dumas. Yeah, he does a lot of stuff.
Does he do the rapid ones like every single day?
He does. It's called EO Fire, Entrepreneur on Fire.
Yeah,
and he does a lot. He puts out a lot of content. He lives in Puerto Rico, and he does a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's a lot of content. Yeah, podcasting is like my favorite thing to do ever.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. How did you get started?
So I started listening to podcasts when the rest of the world, I feel like, started listening to them, which was around the time Serial came out.
Okay.
Did you listen to Serial?
I did listen to Serial.
Yeah.
I'm not a big consumer of that kind of podcast,
I know.
but I did listen to that one.
Is he guilty?
God, that is such I don't know if I can go down that rabbit hole.
I know. But and then I started listening to conversation-based podcasts and interviews, and I was looking for the kind of show where athletes and runners were interviewed, and I wasn't really finding anything that I jived on, so I was just kept envisioning this show out on my own runs, and just decided I was gonna pull the trigger.
I love it. How'd you come up with the name? I'll Have Another.
My sister came up with the name.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had been brainstorming with both of them. I have two sisters. I've been brainstorming with both of them for such a long time, and my sister, who likes to have another glass of wine occasionally, she was like, how about I'll Have Another? It was that or make it a double, which I liked both of those, but
okay, they're both drinking related, which is interesting for a running podcast.
I know. But the thing I thought about was like, I'll have another mile to run. I'll have another. At the time, I was pregnant with my third baby, so it was just like,
I'll have another baby.
What will you have another of?
Okay.
And yes, like people probably think of it as I'll run another marathon, I'll run another mile. But I just whatever you want another of. That's kind of what my vision was.
Awesome. And you have expanded, so you have done 190. How many episodes have you done now?
Yeah, I was just recording my intros for my 191st episode.
Wow, that's impressive.
So I do every Friday. But I noticed you put yours out very consistently.
Every single Wednesday.
Week. Yeah.
Every
you
single
don't miss a
Wednesday. Nope, never missed a Wednesday since we launched.
You can't.
It's important.
Yeah.
This is I'm probably about 40 or so episodes behind you.
Oh, yeah.
And if you keep putting them out, I'll never catch up. So.
I know, that's right. Well, that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I tell people when they ask me about podcasting. I'm like, you can't miss a day. Like if Tuesday is your day and people, even if you only have 5 listeners and they think that your episode comes out on Tuesday, it's a really big deal if you don't put an episode on Tuesday.
Yep. I've come close a couple times publishing at like 11:30 p.m. or something like that. But,
always get it that day. Actually, just recently, I was having some technical issues on my website and I was a day late. And I was also doing a really big event that day. This was this past May. And I think it's probably 2 years ago, I would have been very upset about it. But this time I was like, you know what?
It happens.
It happens. Yeah. It's fine. But you still don't miss the week, you know?
Yep. I hear you. And a lot of people start podcasts, right? So I forget the numbers are really, really high. I think there are probably... I read this morning, I think 30 or 40% more podcasts now than there were 2 years ago.
Crazy.
But a lot of people start podcasts.
Yep.
The question is how many are still around after a while.
Yeah, because you really have to be dedicated.
You have to be committed. So how did you know that you would be committed?
Yeah, well, you know when someone tells you something's going to be hard, and anytime someone gives you a picture in your mind that maybe you can't do it. Someone said something to me when I mentioned what I wanted to do and the kind of conversations I wanted to have. Someone mentioned to me, oh, that would be really difficult to hold those long form conversations. And honestly, like that one comment, I was like, I'm doing it. Like I am not doing this now.
Well, that's a personality because I have the same personality.
Stubborn, yeah.
Yeah. And actually my friends actually joke that the way to get me to do something is to tell me that you can't do it.
Yeah.
But it's not doable or impossible or whatever. But that's certainly a personality. So how did you know that about yourself? And then when you got into this, that it was something that...
Yeah. I mean, so I've been a runner for like 20 some years, a long time. And I kind of, was in the blogging world when all these running blogs were coming out back in the day. And I had a blog myself, but it wasn't super popular or anything. It definitely wasn't profitable. It was just kind of like writing down my race recaps and whatnot. And a lot of people had blogs like that. Well, there were a certain number of people that had blogs like that were making some money and it was their full-time job. So when I decided I wanted to start a podcast, it just made me think about that business, like the blogging business. And I saw that I probably had way more talent in the podcasting world than I would have in the blogging world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How did you suss that out?
I like talking to people. I like having conversations. I like pulling people's stories out. And you can't really do that in a blog post. Like even if you're interviewing someone in a blog post, it's not their voice.
Right.
So you can only pull so much when you send somebody an email and have like 5 questions for them to answer.
Yeah.
I do like to write, but that's just a totally different kind of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And my favorite thing about my podcast is like the conversations. It's similar to this, like we're talking back and forth. I get to pull out their story, but I parlay a little bit of my life into it too, which I think my regular listeners probably appreciate that because they get to know the host.
Sure, absolutely.
It's a balance though, right? Because you don't want to talk too much about yourself.
Yeah. No, I've struggled with that before. You know, how much you interject of your own experience. I think if it's appropriate to what the other person's saying, then it's, it goes.
Totally.
It's good. And people want that, engagement. I think. I don't know.
Hope so.
Yeah, listeners, tell me if you
tell
don't.
Us.
Yeah,
tell us if you want Pablo to stop talking about himself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, it's interesting because the podcasts end up being like a weird X-ray of your own personality in life, right? So I interview all kinds of small businesses, but there's definitely a heavy slant toward things that I'm interested in, music,
Totally.
and art, and things like that. So, at what point did you know that you were going to turn this into a business when you started it, or did that happen over time?
Yeah, it happened over time. So I always tell people, like, don't start a podcast to make money. Like, that's not why you start a podcast. You start a podcast because you're passionate about a certain topic that you think you can deliver really great content on. A lot of people start podcasts because it's like an arm of their business, right? Mm-hmm. I kind of wanted it to be my main arm, which is what everybody warns you against. Like, that's not your main arm of your business. You have your podcast to sell other parts of your business. But I really saw it as something that could turn into at least a part-time job for me. And from the get-go, even though I was taking that own advice, like knowing that if this doesn't turn into a job, I'm doing something I love. So I would say about 6 months in, I realized, okay, this is like rocking and rolling. People are listening, and I can do something more with it.
Cool. So 6 months in. So you were almost 3 or 4 years in that, right?
So this past April, it was 3 years.
Okay. So you've been at it for 2.5 or 2 3/4 years as a business.
Yeah. I mean, I started. Yeah. I mean, I started pitching sponsors for the show probably earlier than I should have, and earlier than I would suggest other people do.
Okay. How did you know when you were ready for a sponsor?
I just thought, I have enough listeners that the sponsor might think that, it's enough people to put money behind their product to market it,
Sure.
And it's,
what do you say now that was too early?
Just because I was super green in the business, and my skills probably weren't as good as I would like looking back, my skills aren't as good as I would have liked them to be. Mm-hmm. Going out pitching sponsors. My audio quality is so much better now. Just the style is a little bit more perfected, and I think I needed to focus more on honing my craft before I was like, let me try to make $200,
Mm-hmm. And is sponsorship the main monetization point for the podcast?
For my podcast, yeah. And then I have other arms of the business, like speaking opportunities. Yeah. I do some coaching for running on the side, and then I have virtual training plans up on my website. So I certainly use my podcast. Well, I don't use my podcast to pitch the coaching because I cap my coaching at 8 people. Okay. And so I'm usually pretty much always capped at the one-on-one because I don't feel like I can give that as much attention if I go any deeper than 8 people. Yeah. So I don't really promote the one-on-one coaching, but I promote my training plans and virtual group coaching on my podcast.
Okay. Very cool. And those are the big arms. So you have speaking, coaching, and podcasting, right?
Yeah, and then some social media type, Instagram type stuff.
Got it. So tell me a little bit more about how these things come together now. Before we get into that, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story. So when you've always been a runner,
yep.
And your podcast is not just about running. It's about running as it pertains. Running is in some ways the anchor. You interview a lot of women runners, and I'd love to understand how that's important to you. But it's also about how that dovetails into life in general, right?
Totally, yeah. I mean, the majority of my guests are female runners. I did start interviewing males about 100 episodes in, but I would say 80% of my interviews are with females. Mm-hmm. And I my episode going out this Friday is a male runner. I mean, yeah, we talk about that part of the person's life quite a bit. But some people, we get more into their family stuff. And if they had any kind of big event in their life, we really get into their story. I always like to ask people how they met their significant other and just really get to know them as a person. I like to find out what kind of music they listen to. The guy that's coming out this Friday, he dropped some song by the White Buffalo that he danced to at his wedding. Yeah.
Which one?
Love Song Number 1.
Okay. Yeah. White Buffalo is pretty awesome.
And then I always ask what your favorite, most recent book is. And he mentioned Scar Tissue by Anthony Kiedis. And I was like, oh, you're really into music. Tell me more, you know? Yeah. So I like to get to know the person deeper than just running. It's interesting, though, because some people come on and they think it's only going to be about running. And I start asking them those deeper questions, which makes for a way more exciting interview.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And when you talk to, so tell me a little bit more about why, for the first 100 episodes and the predominant, what you say, 80% of your guests are female runners, right?
Yeah.
So why is that important to you?
Well, so when I launched the show, I knew I wanted it to be a running themed podcast.
Okay.
And I kind of ventured away from that here and there. Like I would interview a random entrepreneur. Like I've interviewed, you probably know who Jessica Honegger is, the founder of Noonday Collection.
Okay. I'm not familiar.
Okay. I say that because she lives in Austin. That's the only reason.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah. That's the only reason I thought you'd know who she is. Well, I've interviewed her. And so I've interviewed people like that who are entrepreneurs. The founder of Prep Dish, another company who actually used to sponsor my show, but I interviewed her because I thought the business model that she had was really interesting. So I've interviewed people like that. And though those episodes don't get as high of downloads, they're oftentimes some of my favorite interviews.
Yeah.
I have realized though, and you probably pay attention to, what is his name? Seth Godin.
Yeah, sure. I know that.
Yeah. And he really talks about niching down and how a smaller, more engaged audience is better than having everybody listening.
Yeah, that's actually kind of my downfall because I interview all kinds of small businesses.
Yeah.
But I love doing that. It just feeds my curiosity. So it probably is, it doesn't help the overall, I mean, the podcast is doing great, but maybe it would be more successful if I only did like music small businesses.
Yeah.
And I do have plenty of those, but I do a ton of other stuff. I just don't want that limitation.
That's so hard because it's like, well, you're doing what you love. So,
yeah.
And then I know, then my creative brain, like my entrepreneur brain, when you're saying that, I'm like, well, should you start a second podcast that's just music? You know what I mean? Like, because the niching down, because I want that too. Like if I read a book, like I just read this book, Thirst, by the founder of Charity Water, the CEO of Charity Water, Scott Harrison. And I'm like, I want to interview Scott Harrison. Is that a fit for All Have Another, a running podcast? Probably not, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm actually launching a second show with some of my friends where I'm going to be feeding interviews like that into that show instead.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I see the value in niching down, but I also totally hear you on what you just said about your podcast.
I just love doing this. So for me, it's about, it feeds my curiosity. I want to talk to boot makers, barbecue joints, vinyl presses, guitar shops. And I just want to talk about interesting things with interesting people. So.
Well, and the authenticity to that is like oftentimes way more important than paying attention to like making sure you're niching down and doing all the right, correct business type things, you know?
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny you mentioned originally this podcast came out of the business that I started, but now it's an independent podcast.
So you don't even have it attached to the brand of your business anymore?
No, I sold the business.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I sold the business, and the podcast has continued as a passion project.
That's awesome.
Just because I love doing it.
Yeah.
And I mean, we do have sponsors. Maybe I'll insert right here. Boom, we're about to have.
Let's do it. Do you insert during conversation?
No.
Okay. Neither do I.
I'll record that later.
Yeah. Same.
But no, yes, for me that's the most important thing. You know? Yeah. And that's what I'm interested in your perspective, because you've been really successful at turning your content into not just that, but like, and this, right? Which I think is really powerful and interesting. I think, where do you see this going? Because I mean, so you have so many people, podcast consumption is going up, but it's actually not as high as you would think. Like as much as it is growing, there's still a lot of room for it to grow.
Totally.
And also the staying power is ultimately what wins, quote unquote. And the podcasts that have staying power, that's actually not that many either, right? So where do you see this going? Where do you think podcasting is going in 10 years from now?
Yeah.
Call it 5. Things change too fast for 10 years.
Right. Yeah. I know. Well, my husband and I have had this conversation a lot. So this is my business. It's technically our business because we're a family unit and we do things together, but like this is my baby. And we've kind of talked about launching a podcast network because I feel like that's probably big picture, like where it needs to go. And so I'm actually in the process of doing that, like on a very small scale.
Okay. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So I'll have my show in the network, and then the show I'm launching with some friends. And then there's another running podcast that I'm in talks with that wants to launch. It's like a news running podcast. So it'll be like a weekly in the know kind of thing. And then
like who plays what and what race and so forth.
Yeah, kind of.
And
yeah.
what races are coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Or like if there's some big drama in the running world, like something that if you're not immersed in running culture, you would have no idea what they were talking about.
Sure.
And so this friend of mine she lives in California, she listens to my podcast. She's a Patreon supporter, which is another arm of the business.
So you do Patreon?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about podcasting.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about Patreon.
Yeah, we'll go to Patreon after this. But anyway, she had heard me kind of talk about this dream of having a network for a while and wants to launch this show and said, if you're still going to do the network, like I want to latch on somehow. And then I had another friend who is the founder of a pretty cool company here locally in Indianapolis. I won't say names of anything yet because nothing's official, but I've always loved her personality, loved her drive. She's a great marketer. Everything about her, I was like, yes. Like if you hosted a podcast, I would listen. Mm-hmm. And so with those two women and then the podcast I'm starting in mine, I'm like 4 shows. I can start small and grow. So the idea is like you're latched onto my network. So I'm marketing you, I'm promoting you, but then I'm also doing sponsorship sales for all the shows. That's the big picture. But the bigger picture than that is just the community that we'd be creating. Somehow these pieces of the puzzle all kind of fit together and we can support each other.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing how that comes together.
Yeah, I'm kind of nervous about it because like I don't totally know what I'm doing, but you have to go scared and do it anyway.
You gotta try.
Yeah.
And we take a quick break in the conversation here with Lindsey to talk about our sponsor, Gusto. And Gusto is a Gusto, and they are a company that helps you as a small business deal with things like payroll, benefits, and figuring out all your taxes and things that are really a pain to deal with. Nobody I've ever talked to, including myself in my 10 years running my own company, want to deal with all of those things, but they are necessary. They are the grease that keeps the engine running, but that's not the reason you started your company. So work with somebody else. As soon as I could, I started working with somebody else to help me with those aspects of running my small business. And check it out. Sign up at gusto.com/warstories. And when you sign up, you will get 3 free months when you run your first payroll. Let's now get back to our conversation with Lindsey Hein. Tell me about Patreon. So Patreon's a controversial topic in the world of creators.
Yeah.
Some people love it and see it as a way to monetize their content. Some people have tried it and gone away from it. Very recently, Tim Ferriss actually decided to stop doing.
I didn't know he had a Patreon page.
You know what? Maybe it wasn't Patreon. It was like the sponsorship model, or the listener supported model as opposed to ads, right?
So was he doing ads and went to that and went back to ads?
He just went back to ads.
Okay, I haven't listened to his show in a while.
Yeah,
okay.
And
I imagine his ad spots are very expensive.
Yeah, he's got a huge listenership.
Huge.
I mean, he creates good content. So
yeah,
God bless him. But ultimately, there's this like thing about, and they changed the way they were charging. I mean, do you see that as a viable thing for you as a creator?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge arm of monetization, but it's big enough that like I feel like it can pay for my babysitting and pay for these expenses that I'm putting into, while I'm doing the show. I have about 220 Patreon supporters.
Okay.
Most
awesome.
of those people are like $5 or $10 level, and I give them 2 bonus episodes a month. So that's a lot of work. Yeah, it is. So what I do is I give them, my husband and I record an episode once a month, and then I bring on a returning guest once a month. And then occasionally, if I have a big name on the show, I usually ask them once we're almost done with the conversation. I'm like, hey, do you have 15 more minutes? And if it's going well.
Yep.
And then I can say, hey, if you were really liking my conversation with Shalane Flanagan, who won the New York City Marathon a couple years ago, we have 15 extra minutes over here on Patreon. And if you're supporting the show over there, you get access to stuff like that. So that's kind of how I promote it. And I think that I have a decent percentage of people over there. I think it's really hard to get people on board with stuff like that. I personally support 2 Patreon pages myself. So, I mean, I'm on board with it.
There's all these monetization models in China that don't exist here. I don't know if you know about this, but where people, platforms that don't exist in the U.S., but there people tip a nickel, a quarter, $1. Oh, this episode was great. Here's 50 cents.
But like, do they have to get on their computer and put in their credit card information? Because that's
it's
a lot
it's
for
part
a
of
quarter.
It's part of the way that people consume content and media. So I don't know. I think there's potentially other models coming down the pipe.
But the way I see it too is, if you listen to a podcast every single week, and you're getting an hour and a half or whatever of really great content that you're listening to.
Yeah.
So that is like 5 hours a month, 6 hours a month.
Yeah.
I think that's worth $5 a month.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But there's this weird psychological thing with paying for content that quote unquote should be free.
Yeah.
Right?
But think about magazines. You pay $5. I don't buy magazines.
Sometimes magazines are as much as $13.99.
Yeah. Like, I don't personally buy magazines, but for a really long time, people had magazine subscriptions. I pay $10 a month for Spotify subscription.
Yep.
I listen to Spotify way more than 6 hours a month, but you know, if I really like a show, I'm totally on board.
So your episodes are an hour and a half long.
So there's a wide range. It's like anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half usually.
Okay. I'm like 35 to 55 or so.
I would say on average my episodes are like hour 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty rare that I go over an hour.
Yeah.
You're probably more interesting than I am. That's it.
Or just more chatty. I talk about myself too much. I don't know.
So can you think of a time when things went really wrong? And what happened? What'd you do about it?
Well, a couple times. One time I had my mic turned off.
Ooh.
Yeah, I was interviewing Des Linden. She won the Boston Marathon in 2018 when it was like a monsoon. It was a really big deal. Mm-hmm. And she'd been on my show before, but I had been trying for like 5 months to get her back on post-Boston because everybody wanted to interview her post-Boston. And, she was all over. She was on the Today Show, Good Morning America, Barstool Sports. Like, she was making the big media rounds. Mm-hmm. She like presented an award with Taylor Swift, like big deal. Anyway, finally, when I got her agent to agree to do the interview, that happened. And I was going to edit it the next week, and I just saw a line
on your graphic editor
on my side.
Yeah.
And it just hurts. And so then I was like, could I figure out a way to just like insert questions on my own?
Yeah.
But and there was another interview that was the same. I had done them back to back. Mm-hmm. And so I emailed the one gal who's also a professional runner and but hadn't had, quite the fame that Des had. And I figured she'd probably be more willing. And she did. And then I emailed her, Des's agent, and just was like, hey, I feel like an idiot.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I just was wondering if you could extend some grace and if we could re-record this. And they were like, no problem.
Wow.
But full circle, it's so funny because that was the second time I ever interviewed her. So technically the third. Yeah. Because I did one time.
Sure.
Didn't put my mic on. She re-recorded with me. And then this past March, I had the opportunity to do a live recording with her in New York City with the New York Roadrunners. And so we made it this big joke, before the conversation. I said, hey, you should make some joke about like me
turning your mic on.
Yeah. And so she's like, Lindsey, this is your one job as a podcaster. And it ended up being really fun. And
one job.
Yeah. And it made it so that we were way more comfortable with each other.
Actually, that happened to me. Not the exact same thing, but my battery on my recorder ran out 10 minutes into an hour show. So, Mick, if you're listening to this out of Springfield, Missouri, thank you for being a champ and re-recording.
He re-recorded?
Yeah.
Do you have rechargeable batteries?
No.
No. And did you have extras and did you change them out or?
Yeah. Well, he came back. I didn't notice until after you left. I was like, oh. So I looked at the file and it was 10 minutes. I'm like, why is that 10 minutes?
Why? I think that's probably that kind of stuff is like the biggest podcast fails.
Yeah.
And so far into it, people are probably thinking, how are you still making mistakes like that? But human.
Yep. It happens. tell me a little bit more about how you think about developing. First of all, how do you find your guests?
Social media and just the news. You know, like if there's a big race, I'm always trying to get whoever won or whoever had a really great performance, like bigger names on the show. Yeah. But then I like to have the everyday runners and people on as well. I mean, some of them. So
you're saying there's a chance?
There's a chance. Do you run 5Ks?
I've ran half marathons.
There you go.
But I'm not what you would call built like a gazelle.
Well,
so I had some severe ITB issues that limited my ability to run longer distances. But I can go out and run at a solid 8 to 9 minute pace. I can run out call it a 10K or 15K.
Yeah.
Well, for someone my size, I'll take it.
I mean, anybody who runs is a runner.
Sure.
And I think that probably the majority of people that listen to my show aren't running marathons.
Yeah.
They would probably consider themselves more of a 5K half marathoner.
Yeah.
I mean, the marathon is glamorous. People love to talk about doing marathons, and it's definitely worshipped in the sport. But you run a mile, you're a runner.
There you go. You run to the fridge, you're a runner.
That's right. My kids are really good at that.
That's awesome. How do you balance all this with your family? So you have 4 kids.
Yeah.
Which is an impressive amount of kids. And how do you balance all this? So you have your family, your business, and where do you see all of this in your life?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in creating balance, and I think that a lot of people in the culture that I live in think that they like to say balance. Can you cuss?
You can do whatever you want. I'll put an explicit tag on it.
People like to say balance is bullshit.
Okay.
And I just don't think that's true. But maybe I'm living in not reality because I'm not a doctor or someone who works 70 hours a week, But I choose to work part-time. I choose to put 25 hours a week in or something like that. I choose to come home on the days that I do work, come home at 6 and say, I'm not working anymore tonight. I'm going to put my kids to bed. I'm going to watch Big Little Lies, and then I'll be asleep by 9:30 and I'll get up at 5:30 and I'll read, and then I'll go run, and then I'll bang out a little bit of work, and then I'll do kids, so I think that it has to be super intentional because if I wanted to, we could get done with this podcast. I could go deal with my kids for 2 hours, and then I could find something to work on for 3 more hours before I go to bed.
Sure.
I don't want to live like that.
Yeah.
And that's not to say I haven't put hard work in. I mean, when I launched my podcast, I was oftentimes up until midnight or 1 a.m. while pregnant with my 3rd baby because I was trying to figure out how to do this thing. Yeah. The technology side is not my strong suit.
Okay.
It took some work. But, I just intentionally choose to not commit to too much and to say no to things that I don't think make sense for my life or my family. I just had a conversation with someone who was asking me to speak at this podcast event in October. It's an hour away, and I just decided I don't have time to do that. And even though it could be a good
it's okay to say no.
Yeah.
So for me, I just recently had a major publication here in the U.S. I won't mention them. Invite me to be a columnist, and I came to the realization, I accepted it. And then I started doing it, and then I came to the realization that I did not have the bandwidth to do that and give it the attention that it deserved. So I just, emailed them thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity, and it's really prestigious. It looks very good to be a writer for this publication. And sometimes you just have to choose the things that you want to focus on. So I had to say no.
Yeah, you say no.
At least no for now. I mean, hopefully down the line, who knows? But at least at this time, because I feel like nobody wins if you end up, spreading yourself so thin that you do a shitty job at everything. So.
Yeah, and I don't want.
Now you open. By the way, you opened the Pandora's box, and now I'm gonna cuss the whole rest of the show.
Oh. No, I mean, and I don't want. My husband is super supportive of this business, and he's behind me 100% everything we do with it. But I don't want him ever to be annoyed that I'm working till 10 p.m. every night. And I wouldn't want him to work that late every night. You live, like, this is so cliche, but like you only live once. I'm 35. I feel like that's like mid 30s, mid 40s, whatever, has to be like some of the best decades of your life. And like, I don't want to spend it only working. I also don't want to be a full-time stay-at-home mom, you know? So I've created this balance.
Well, you also happen to, and this is an interesting seg, but you live in Indianapolis, which has, I'm sure relative to other parts of Indiana, high cost of living, but relative to other major cities in the U.S., probably a medium to low cost of living.
For sure.
And that allows you to also make those choices, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think that no matter where we lived, though, I would personally probably choose to do, I would like to think I would choose to do the same with work and kids.
Sure.
If I could.
Sure. But you have more freedom to do that if your monthly nut for income is lower.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
For sure. Cost of living is way lower in Indy than, say, Austin or New York.
Well, I don't even know about Austin, but certainly New York or, San Francisco, LA, Chicago, other cities that, where you have, $10,000 mortgages and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's affordable living for sure in Indy. And also, like, I would like to think that no matter how much money I made, I would still be living the same kind of life.
Yeah.
It's not to say you wouldn't maybe go on more trips or things like that, but I've always thought like that. I've always felt like that in my heart. Like, I drive a Honda Odyssey. It's a nice minivan. Like,
yeah.
I would like to think if I was a multimillionaire, I would still drive a Honda Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care about cars. I don't care about things like that.
Yeah.
And I think I would intentionally still choose to live in the neighborhood we live in because it's a fairly diverse neighborhood in a diverse part of town. And I like raising my kids in that culture.
That's awesome. So that sounds really intentional. Like you're thinking about these things and doing what you want to do.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, for sure.
Not everybody does that.
Right. No, like I'm totally maybe to a fault overthinking how I can expose my kids to people that aren't just like them and things that aren't just, what all the other kids at school are doing. And yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about it all the time.
How do you think about that in terms of your podcast and the guests you bring on? How do you try to get different perspectives and different things so that it's not everybody's not the same?
Totally. That's really hard because a lot of female distance runners are skinny white females. You know what I mean? Like in America, that's who you're interviewing a lot of. So I try to diversify my guests. I mean, you're not going to look at my guest list and see a huge list of diverse guests as far as like racial diversity. I mean, I'll say it right now. Like, you just won't. Mm-hmm. It's something I do intentionally look to do, but I also don't want to bring someone on my show just for that reason, you know? So
okay.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is tough. It is tough. It's something that I've tried to do on the show is bring in people from all walks of life. But a lot of times, it's also, you definitely have to make an effort. Right.
Which I don't even want to, like, I hate saying that. Like, I hate saying that I have to make the effort because you don't want it to, I don't know. You don't want it to even feel like it's a thing. Like, I just want to have these guests on because they're interesting people,
But we all have a tendency as human beings to want to talk to and interview people who are similar to us, whether or not we admit it.
Totally.
Right. So I think sometimes it takes forcing yourself to be uncomfortable to be like, okay, who else could I talk to that has an interesting perspective
for sure
that is nothing like me.
Yeah. And I think,
and by the way, I have the same problem. Like, I also interview a lot of people who are similar to me. So
totally. And I think that that takes more research on my part, and that's important that I do that. I mean, the female distance running scene in America, people look a lot alike, but that's also like, I don't have to only interview fast runners,
Yeah. Thank God. I have a shot.
Right. There you go. You have a shot on the show. But yeah, no, that's a really great question and a really great point and something I have focused on, but I'm not going to try to say I've done the best job at it.
Cool. What is your number one piece of advice for somebody who's either thinking about starting a podcast or starting their own small business, or maybe just running their own podcast or business right now?
Well, first, don't let the fear of not knowing what to do stop you, because you're never going to do anything if that stops you, right? Second, if you want to start a podcast, don't start a podcast, like I said earlier, to make money. Start a podcast because you're passionate about wanting to share information or build a community, or you have a topic that you just really want to learn more about. Like the people you interview, you want to learn more about their stories.
Yeah.
I think that the authenticity piece there is so important because the second you try to make it something that you're not actually passionate about yourself, it's probably not going to work. And man, starting a business is hard and scary. And I don't know about you, but like for me, I do it all by myself. And one of the hardest parts is it gets lonely. Like I want to ask people questions and bounce ideas off of them. And like my husband works in finance and he's not an entrepreneur at all. He goes to an office, he works, an 8 to 5 job. I mean, he gets home at like 8 or 9 sometimes and it's a long day, but he's not an entrepreneur. And so I think that's really hard. And so to find a group of people that you can invest in and they can invest in you to support each other that are kind of doing that same kind of work is really important.
I guess that kind of goes back full circle to the network you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Like these people that are starting shows that don't know anything about podcasting or this is a profession or a hobby even. Like it's really important to have a network of people that support you. And you can't be scared to reach out. I mean, you don't want to be the person that's constantly asking random people to coffee to pick their brain. That's a common thing. But to have some sort of, for lack of a better term, like mastermind group where you can all say, hey, I learned this the other day. This is something that could be really important to implement in your business. I'm using it in mine.
Yeah, that's awesome. Where can people find you? If people are interested in listening to your podcast, finding out more about you and the work you're doing, where can people find you?
So my podcast is called I'll Have Another with Lindsey Hein. If you're not a runner, don't let that scare you. We do go deeper into conversation, not just running. And then you can find me on Instagram. I'm Lindsey Hein 626. And I have a Facebook page as well. And then Twitter, I'm at Lindsey Hein.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Lindsey.
Thanks.
Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah.
Best of luck and congratulations on your success.
Thanks so much.
I look forward to connecting again in the future.
Thank you.
Take care. Small Business War Stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes.